Kidderminster, the audience is immediately reminded of carpets. The local rag even uses it in its title, not with provincial taglines as the Kidderminster Chronicle or the Kidderminster Evening Post, but of the rather imaginative title of the Shuttle. Well done, Kidderminster. But where is it, you may ask? It is a market town located 27 miles southwest of Birmingham and 15 miles north of Worcester. But our tale involves the gruesome mutilation and murder of a 64-year-old mother of 13. Over to you, James, to describe it.
On the 4th of October 1903, Fred Parry, a cowman, was driving the herd back to Agborough Farm on Agborough Lane. This road had 14-foot high hawthorn banks on each side, which separated the farm from the recently created Kidderminster Golf Course. Some of the cows refused to budge, and he looked for the reason for their intransigence. He discovered a woman's body lying at the edge of the lane. Hustling the herd back to the farm, he went to his boss, Mr. Whitehouse, who told his son, Thomas, to go by bicycle to Chester Road Police Station for help. The police acted very swiftly and closed all roads in the vicinity and talked to anyone trying to leave the area. The corpse was in a distressing state, having been severely beaten, stabbed, slashed and gouged all over. She had 20 stab wounds to her face and neck. She sported 2 black eyes and a broken nose. The woman's throat had been cut. There was a 7-inch wound on her stomach, and the left thigh was almost severed from the body. She seemed to have put up a fierce struggle, as there were bruises on her face, top of her legs, and backs of her hands. A bloody knife was on top of the body. Her skin was still warm, and it was estimated that she had met her death at around midnight on the 3rd to the 4th of October. There was a 50-yard gap between the first assault and her final resting place, according to the blood trail. A shawl was used to cover the body. But who was she? Possessions found on her included a Roman Catholic Bible, a clay pipe, and some coloured matches. Nearby were some type of identity cards that indicated she had recently worked as a hop picker at 2 nearby farms. From these, her name was found to be Mary Swinburne. Mr. Whitehouse was certainly a believer in every cloud has a silver lining. He blocked off the lane, and his son-in-law manned the gates as visitors were charged 1 old pence to view the scene. But to give him his due, proceeds went to a local hospital. Whether he was shamed in this act, we shall never know. More details emerged concerning the unfortunate Mary. Her underclothes bore the stamp of the Walsall workhouse. Police inquiries revealed that she had been an inmate of the said institution, though she occasionally lived locally with her son. Of her 13 children, 9 were still alive. Her husband had deserted her, and the stress of caring for her extended brood had turned her into an alcoholic. She had discharged herself from the workhouse on the 15th of August to go hop-picking. Her last employer was a Mr. Depper at Clifton-on-Team up to the 2nd of October, and she was paid the princely sum of 2 shillings, 20 pence in today's money. He was interviewed by the police and revealed that he had taken some of the staff to the Rising Sun pub in Stourport and brought them all some beer. Mr. Depper also had offered to pay for her fare to Kidderminster, which she had accepted. From the station, she is thought to have walked 3 miles to the Wren's Nest pub. The landlord reported serving a woman about 7 o'clock in the evening. He refused to give her beer, but served her some water, which she drank, while sitting outside smoking a pipe. She had cadged some coloured matches from a local boy. The police made appeals for witnesses and were inundated with replies. For instance, some claimed that she had left Stourport with 2 men following her. There were the usual sightings of strange men in the area, including those who looked foreign. But there was one report of a blood-stained man on a tram to Kinver. But some were more promising. A farmer remembered that a couple had visited him that evening and asked to stay the night in the barn. He refused, and the couple went on their way towards Stourport. He later identified the corpse as one of the same people who had visited, but crucially, he was able to give a good description of the man. A Percy Mallard came forward and said that he was walking with his girlfriend to the same farm at around 8 p.m. when he heard a shout of, "Oh, don't, Bill!" He could not see anything further, as clouds suddenly covered the moon. Moments later, a man came past them, but he had come from the opposite direction to the scream. A local train driver reported seeing a couple on the Kidderminster line. The woman was drunk, and the man appeared to be supporting her. Matters were looking up for the boys in blue. We now had a positive description of the couple, and the time of death could now be approximated properly through the scream. One witness had seen a drunken woman near Agborough Farm. He claimed that the corpse was the same Mary Swinburne that had been seen near the farm. More importantly, he gave a good description of her companion. He was between 50 to 60 years old and around 5 foot 5 inches in height. His clothes were dark and his hat was pulled low over his forehead. He also had an almost white moustache. The police started making arrests. A man matching the description was arrested but released after proving that he was at work at the crucial time of the murder. There was certainly a blood-stained man on the Kimber tram, but this resulted from a fight in Worcester. A beggar was picked up and later released. On the 2nd of January 1907, a vagrant called George Fisher was sentenced to 10 days' imprisonment at Market Raisin in Lincolnshire. As was normal practice, he was given a bath, clothes, and his personal items were searched. A notebook was found, and whilst the warder was called away, he tore out a page from the notebook and put it in his mouth. Now this was indigestible, and he threw the pulped paper under the bath. A prisoner on cleaning duty reported seeing what had happened to the warder when he came back. The paper was retrieved, and the wording on it was, "I murdered Mary on Saturday evening on the 1st of October at Kidderminster, Worcestershire. God help me. Murder will out some day." The details of the wording were slightly different, as the date of the murder was not the 1st of October, but around midnight of the 3rd of October, which was the actual date. His spelling was awful, but universal education was still in its infancy. On being confronted with the page, he admitted that he had written it and remarked, "There's some truth in that. I didn't intend for you to have it." Whilst in prison for his vagrancy charge, George Fisher told the warder that a woman had been murdered in Agborough Lane near Kidderminster. Her name was Mary Swinburne, and she used to be called Walsall Mary. This gave the police the excuse to arrest him on his release and accuse him of the wilful murder of Mary. Guilty as charged, as they say. But George Fisher had changed his tune. He even said to the police, "I've said too much already. You must prove it." The defence of not guilty was all important, as the Poor Persons Defence Act of 1903 had just been passed, and legal aid was not available to those who pleaded guilty. Bear in mind that we are witnessing the beginnings of the legal aid system. It was, and still is, not popular with the bar due to inadequate fees. In her study on Sir Edward Marshall Hall, Sally Smith reported that the fee of £3, 5 shillings and 6pence would be the equivalent to £300 today. But the murder rate in Edwardian England was rare, and this covered the complete trial. To make matters worse, the judge could choose any barrister, and invariably junior counsel would be appointed, as they tended to hang around the court looking for work. At his trial, George Fisher even admitted that the weapon on Mary Swinburne's chest was his, but he claimed that he had lost it in Ledbury some days before the murder. Charles Sparry and William Shingler both identified him as the companion of Mary. Shingler's description of the visitors to his farm would have been very helpful to the police. It was looking like a one-way trip to the scaffold, but help was at hand. Fisher insisted that he worked in South Molton in Devon for a man called Thomas Vickery. The latter was brought to court and said that he could not recognise the accused. The judge asked that Fisher should speak to him. On hearing him talk, Vickery recognised the voice and said that he had worked for him constantly between the 18th of September and the 17th of October 1903. Another of Vickery's employees confirmed that on the night in question, Fisher was with him unloading trucks at South Molton Station. The counsel for the defence at this point naturally queried the identification of his client as the man who was with Mary on the night when she had died. It was dark and the description of the accused did not match how his client looked now. This cast doubt on the whole case. In his summing up of the case, the judge stated that due to all of the doubts that had arisen, he would need much stronger evidence in order for the case to be proved beyond doubt. He instructed the jury that there should be an acquittal, which they promptly agreed to. George Fisher was free and returned to South Molton. The case had now gone cold for the police, but in 1914 a former vagrant of Kidderminster, Alfred Kimberley, whilst in prison in Canada, confessed to the murder of Mary Swinburne. Coincidentally at the time, two former residents of Kidderminster were also living in Canada and went to see Kimberley in prison to find out what he had to say. At the time of the murder, he had been working for a plumber in the town, but shortly after the crime was committed, he began to drink heavily and eventually lost his job. When the murder took place, he would have been around 20 years old, so did not resemble the description of the man seen with Mary, who was considerably older. His confession was dismissed as false by the police. Once again the trail went cold. Even though there had been two confessions, the murder of Mary Swinburne remains unsolved to this day. So John, from your viewpoint, what are your thoughts on this case?
Hop picking was a huge, labour-intensive industry, lasting from late August until early October. We think of it as a Kentish practice, but Worcestershire and Herefordshire had many hop farms. Huge numbers of families would travel from industrial areas for what they regarded as a working holiday. It only ended in the 1950s with the introduction of mechanisation and the standardisation of school holidays through various education acts. They were joined by various travelling folk. You can imagine the police keeping an eye on these people. But why would Mr. Depper give the temporary staff a free beer up the road? It was the end of the hop picking season and he wanted nobody to hang around the farm. So he put them on a cart and took them for a beer some miles away at the nearest station. How does one account for the behaviour of George Fisher? Instead of trying to clear his name immediately, he wrote down in his notebook a supposed confession of murdering Mary Swinburne in Kidderminster whilst he was obviously in Devon on the fateful night. It is difficult to speculate through modern eyes the behaviour of a vagrant in 1904. Being picked up by the police on the 2nd of January and kept in a warm cell with some food and drink may have been preferable to begging for food in awful weather or suffering the indignity of the workhouse. Here is a man who is literally in society's gutter. For the first time in his life, he is a somebody. He can show to anyone the reports of the press, and for the first and probably only time in his miserable life, people listen to him. Even today, celebrities have to be careful of nobodies wishing to harm them so they can be famous. As Andy Warhol once remarked, everyone must be famous for 15 minutes. Why did Thomas Vickery not recognise George Fisher? A barber from South Molton in Devon testified in court that at the beginning of October 1903 his hair and moustache had been trimmed. A few months on the streets would certainly have changed his appearance. People's regional accents were much stronger in those days, as the influence of the radio or the movies would affect speech patterns later in the century.